If you haven't already, please go ahead and hit the like button. No. Hello guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be all about convicts. So I want to touch on a few different topics to do with convicts and the convict sort of system. The first thing I think I'll talk about is the changing kind of attitudes towards having convict ancestry in Australia. And then I will talk a little bit about convict records and some examples like that. I might talk a bit about one of my convict ancestors as an example. Anyway, I'll just sort of see where the mood takes me, whatever that is. If you haven't already, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell because it really helps out my channel when you do. And let's get into this video. So the first thing I want to say is a lot of Australians have convict ancestry, but a lot of Australians don't know that they have convict ancestry. So first, just let me take you back in time to the convict era, and just know that in England at that time, Botany Bay was something of a joke in their society. So once people had been to Australia, they didn't tend to go back. So if you're a convict and you served out your sentence in Australia, most likely you never went home to England, you just stayed in Australia. And there was two prime reasons for this. One of them was that some people had conditional pardons, so it might have been in the terms of their sort of pardon that they remained in the colony even when their sentence was expired. But the second reason is that they would tend to face prejudice if they went home to England, because having just been in Australia, having been a convict, created this created a negative kind of connotation, and you weren't really welcomed back into society. So apparently it wasn't even just convicts who faced this. One of the surgeon superintendents who had been in Australia for years and returned to England found himself, even when he was in sort of society circles, if he happened to mention having been in Australia, people made excuses to get away from him. They checked their pockets. He was sort of socially excluded. So even if you weren't really a convict, just having been in Australia was like a tarnish to your reputation. For the convicts who remained in the colony, there were also social kind of issues to face. So freed convicts versus free settlers was a bit of an issue, especially in Tasmania and in New South Wales. So the free settlers made sort of a big effort to distinguish themselves as separate from the convicts. So it made it sometimes difficult for convicts to move from being sort of a prisoner into being a freed sort of person once they'd finished their term. So they're often excluded from sort of social circles, and some districts even got together and prevented ex-convicts from buying land. So it really kind of kept them downtrodden. They were also often plagued by a police presence. So the police tended to sort of dog their movements, even once they were freed. So they were sort of, it was like they're expected to reoffend, and they were treated that way. A lot of them were also unemployed. There was an 1853 parliamentary committee that said, "The class to which they belong, their general inferiority as labourers, and the growing dread of the frightful practices to which it is well known many of them are addicted, render their search for employment often tedious and difficult." So you can see why it became an attractive option for ex-convicts and their families and descendants to try to distance themselves from that convict history. They wanted to get on with their lives, they wanted to be employed and things like that, move in higher social circles. So it became something that, you know, you would want to hide your past in that case. So it really ended up that there were kind of two classes of ex-convict. There were those that were forever tarnished by their past and just couldn't escape that. And there were those who managed to successfully bury it and move into society and hide their past, essentially. Some ex-convicts who went on to particularly higher kind of achievements, like for example, one who became the Minister of Lands and Works in 1888, I think it was. So there were people like that who climbed high, and those people, you tended to just see that their convict past was just never mentioned. So there are biographies of these people in early books, and those books often will say, you know, this person immigrated in 1842 or whatever, and that'll just sort of gloss over the fact that they didn't just emigrate, they were a convict. But encyclopedias of the time just refer to them as immigrants, and that they worked when they got here, stuff like that. So it seemed that if you managed to overcome your convict past and you managed to become, like, if you managed to climb up society, then perhaps it was sort of like a no-no to mention your convict past. So maybe it was considered rude or something. So if you managed to put it behind you, then it was like we all just won't say anything. So aside from burying the past of individuals, Australia in general started to try to bury its convict past. So for example, there were place name changes. So Van Diemen's Land was changed to Tasmania, and more specifically Port Arthur, which was one of the secondary penal colonies, was changed to Carnarvon, or Carnarvon. Why doesn't that sound right? Anyway, it was Carnarvon, I'm sure. So the text, The History of Australasia, which was published in 1879, just gave a really brief introductory note referring to convicts and the convict system, just a tiny little bit. And they said that it was because talking any more about it would tend to no good purpose. So it was like they were aware that they just wanted to distance from it. At this time, they were also, and this is incredibly devastating to genealogists now, they were destroying records like crazy. So there was an exchange in New South Wales Parliament about this. In 1901, there was a little, this is in the Legislative Assembly papers, there's an exchange between a few ministers, and here you can see, I wish to ask the Colonial Secretary whether it is a fact that a person who is editing the public records of New South Wales has power to suppress whatever he deems right. And then Mr. C replies, I'm not aware of the fact, but I will cause inquiries to be made. After all, perhaps there are some matters in connection with the history of New South Wales which it is just as well not to perpetuate. I know that the late Sir John Robertson ordered the destruction of a lot of old records. Mr. Fitzpatrick, he made a great mistake. Mr. C, I do not think he did. I do not think that the sins of the fathers should be visited upon the children. I do not think that the children of men who were sent to this country, perhaps for taking a halter or a lolly out of an old lady's lolly shop, should be branded as the descendants of felons for all time. So even though it seems kind of progressive, and it's true, you don't want to brand, you know, the descendants of convicts forever for what maybe their ancestor did, that seems like a progressive viewpoint, but destroying those old records seems like a really extreme way of going about it. And this is just one example, was known to be quite widespread at that time. So you would have noticed that John C referred to John Robertson destroying a lot of records in the 1870s. So this wasn't an isolated case. There is evidence that 4.5 tons of convict records were burnt in 1863 on the orders of the Governor of New South Wales, Sir John Young. Marcus Clarke wrote in 1871 of the wanton destruction and mutilation of many Tasmanian convict records. And the antiquarian J.W. Beattie complained bitterly to the bookseller George Robertson in 1899 that the Tasmanian government had been ruthlessly blotting out the history of the colony for years past, and defended his action in saving Port Arthur records from consignment to the New Zealand paper mills. So I'm just really trying to paint a picture of what happened in the past and how that led to so many modern Australians not knowing about their convict ancestry. Like, in the past, they made such efforts to distance Australia and Australians from our convict roots that it's no wonder that most of us aren't aware that we're descended from convicts. Okay, so if you have Australian ancestors, how can you tell if your ancestor was a convict? There are a few ways. So for starters, birth, death, and marriage records. Those will sometimes refer to whether your ancestor was a convict, or it may refer to when they arrived or on what ship they arrived, and you can go into details about that and figure that out. You might also find them on muster or census records, so those are also possibilities. And despite so much destruction of convict records of the past, we still have quite a lot. So if you know the name of the ship that your ancestors arrived on, you can check the convict indents. You can find those on Find My Past. I am a brand ambassador for Find My Past, so if you don't have a subscription and you would like a 20% discount, look below in the description box and it has all the details there, or send me a message if you can't figure it out. So yeah, the convict indents are fantastic for, yeah, they're just all of the shipping logs, and they have lots of other convict records there too. If you don't know the name of the ship that they're on, you can also check the musters or the very early census. I think the 1828 census is still available, and that has some of that information on it, so it might tell you the ship that they're on there. Other records that you can look at are things that would be referring to once the convict had already arrived in Australia. So there are convict assignment kind of records, that is where they were sent to work and what they were sent to do. The Colonial Secretary's papers are also fantastic. They're a great resource if your convict was mentioned in them. I'll just show you a handful of the records that I found for one of my convict ancestors. I actually have 8 convict ancestors that I found in my tree. There may possibly be more, but I don't think so. I think 8's going to be my number. But today I'll show you some that I found for my 4 times great-grandfather, Joseph Bridge. Joseph was sent to Australia in 1804 aboard the convict ship Fortune. He was sentenced for passing forged notes. So him and his brother and their friend went out on what I guess you could describe as like a pub crawl, and they forged the banknotes to pay for everything and were caught. So unfortunately, Joseph's brother and his friend were both executed. They were all 3 sentenced to death, and the brother and friend were executed first. Joseph, however, was very lucky that the people in town rallied behind him, and all sort of, well, not all of them, but there were quite a lot of signatures on a letter stating his good behavior and begging for him to be released. He wasn't released, but his death sentence was downgraded to transportation. So yeah, he arrived here in 1804. So here is one record. This is from the absolute and conditional pardons, and you can see this one has a lot of good information on it. I love this one. Here's the second one. This is from indents. Sometimes if you've got, there may be multiple convicts with the same name. Like I think there were actually more than one Joseph Bridge, but you can use the ship name to distinguish who your person is. So I know that my Joseph arrived on the Fortune. So yeah. So here's this third one, and it is from the New South Wales and Tasmania settlers and convicts. These records are fantastic. There's heaps of these. Here's another one that is from the same collection. Now this one, you can see it's not so straightforward to see what it is exactly. So I actually had a look on National Archives UK website. So I looked at you can see that little number sort of code on the side. It says HO10/19. And when I looked that up, it's just a general muster from 1825. So it tells me that he is aboard a prison hulk in 1825. So although he arrived in 1804 and he worked off his sentence, he had 5 children with, I'm going to say his wife, though they weren't really officially married. But they were caught reoffending, whether or not, I don't know if I should go into this story. So it's actually kind of interesting, I think. So they were caught receiving stolen goods in 1825. What happened was there were 3 highway robbers, and apparently Joseph Bridge and his wife Elizabeth had some of this stolen property in their house. What I found interesting was when I looked at the court sort of records, what actually happened was that the police officer was suspicious or had a hunch, and he decided to just go into their property, and he came out with, oh, I found these stolen goods, so, you know, there's that. But that would never happen today. Like a lone police officer on his own with no warrant who just decided to just walk in. Like, how do you know that, you know, he didn't plant those goods? So there's, you know, that possibility. Maybe the cop just had it in for them. Or maybe they were guilty. But I'm sure that receiving stolen goods was hardly unusual at that time. But look at me making excuses. Anyway, they were caught and convicted, and Joseph was put aboard a prison hulk. So that's where he is now listed here in 1825. Find My Past also has a lot of records that, you know, it might not be the original, but they've got the indexes on there. So this one, for example, places him at Moreton Bay. That's another penal colony that was up in Queensland, and it's placed him there on the 20th of July 1827. So yeah, I highly recommend Find My Past for convict records. They've got lots. You should also check out New South Wales State Archives and Link Tasmania if you're looking for Tasmanian convicts. Okay, I think that covers everything that I wanted to talk about today. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and please let me know in the comments if you had convict ancestors. Did you always know that you had convict ancestors, or did you discover it when you were doing genealogy research like I did? Alright, so thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon in my next video. Bye guys.